She didn't expect the day to turn into a storm. She was just trying to get through another busy shift, serving tables and keeping her head down. But everything changed the moment a powerful billionaire CEO walked in, carrying an ego that filled the room before he even spoke. By the end of that encounter, her dignity had been attacked, her worth questioned, and her name dragged through the mud by a man who believed his money placed him above consequence. What he didn't know was that one careless insult, spoken loud enough for the wrong ears to hear, would set off a chain of events that spiraled far beyond that restaurant. In a matter of hours, whispers turned into headlines, and a private humiliation became a public reckoning. The world was about to watch a billionaire crumble, not because of a business mistake, but because of a moment of cruelty he assumed no one would challenge. How did a single word cost him a fortune, and expose the truth he tried to bury? Before the story unfolds, tell me, where are you watching this from? Aliyah had learned to live with long days. Most mornings started before sunrise, when the city was still quiet and the streets outside her small apartment felt half asleep. She'd brew a cheap cup of coffee, tie her hair back, and prepare herself for another shift at the downtown restaurant that kept her afloat. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and she took pride in doing her job well. Her coworkers admired how she stayed patient even on the busiest days, and regular customers often asked for her by name. In a place where people came and went in a blur, she brought a sense of calm. Outside of work, her world was simple. She visited her grandmother on weekends, studied for her hospitality certification at night, and saved every dollar she could. She carried big dreams quietly, the way many people do when life doesn't give much room for mistakes. But even with the pressure she faced, Aliyah tried to keep a hopeful outlook. She believed hard work meant something. She believed respect could still be earned. Yet there were moments, subtle ones, when reality reminded her that the world didn't always treat everyone the same. A customer speaking over her. Someone ignoring her greeting. A tight smile from a manager who only stepped in when a problem involved the wrong kind of person. These small cuts didn't stop her, but they left marks she never fully shared. The restaurant itself carried its own rhythm, rushed lunches, spilled drinks, impatient diners tapping their feet. And on that particular week, with corporate clients pouring into the city for a massive industry convention, the tension in the air felt heavier. Staff whispered about big names checking into nearby hotels. Executives with impossible demands. Investors who expected perfection. Everyone braced for long hours and short tempers. Aliyah wasn't intimidated. She'd handled difficult customers before, but she could sense that something was different. There was a feeling she couldn't quite explain, like the quiet before a storm touches down. She kept moving from table to table, unaware that her life was about to cross paths with someone whose influence reached far beyond the walls of the restaurant. She didn't know that a single encounter would travel farther than anything she had ever imagined. She didn't know how fast a private moment could become public. And she had no idea that one powerful man, walking into her section with the confidence of someone used to being feared, would alter the course of her future. The lunch rush had barely started when the shift took a sharp turn. Aliyah noticed the change first in the way her manager straightened his posture, smoothing his shirt as if preparing for inspection. Then came the quiet whispers from the servers near the front door. A powerful corporate figure had just arrived, someone tied to the massive convention happening nearby. His name carried weight in the business world, and even people who didn't follow corporate news seemed to recognize it. The mood shifted the way it does when a storm cloud rolls over a sunny sky. When the billionaire CEO stepped inside, he moved like the room belonged to him. His presence drew stares, not because of charm, but because of the cold confidence that trailed behind him. He didn't smile. He didn't greet anyone. He simply scanned the room as if assessing which part of it was worthy of him. Aliyah felt that familiar tension creep into her chest, the one she used to ignore but had learned to trust. People like him often turned small moments into heavy ones. He was seated in her section. She approached his table with the same professionalism she brought to every interaction. But from the second she reached him, she could tell he had already decided what he thought of her. He didn't make eye contact. He didn't respond to her greeting. He tapped his fingers impatiently, as though her presence was an inconvenience. She tried to dismiss it. Some customers simply had bad attitudes, but something in his expression hinted at something deeper, something sharper. The first comment slipped out like it was nothing, a criticism of how long he'd been waiting, even though she'd walked over within seconds. Then came the complaint about the table, the lighting, and the menu, all delivered with a tone that suggested she was personally responsible for every flaw in the world. She kept her voice steady and her posture calm. Losing her composure was not an option, not today, not with the restaurant packed and managers watching. But it got worse. When she returned with his drink, he looked her up and down with a smirk that made her skin crawl. His voice dropped low, just enough for only a few neighboring tables to hear. The word he used didn't belong in a workplace. It didn't belong anywhere. It cut through her dignity with surgical precision. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to make two customers at the next table look away, pretending they hadn't heard. Her breath caught. She felt a heat rise in her chest, the kind that comes from humiliation layered over years of unspoken moments. She wanted to defend herself. She wanted to walk away. But she also knew how often people who looked like her weren't believed, or worse, were blamed. She tried to step back, hoping the moment would pass. But the CEO wasn't done. He leaned back in his chair, proud of himself, like he'd proven something. Then he said the word that would later explode across the internet, the one that stripped away his polished reputation in a single breath. Stupid. Not just as an insult, but laced with a tone that carried centuries of violence, a tone that sought to place her beneath him. A nearby customer stiffened. Another pulled out her phone, unsure whether to record or stay silent. Even the manager hesitated, torn between protecting the restaurant's image and confronting a man whose company could make or break their business. Alia felt the world closing in. She could walk away, but walking away meant carrying the weight alone. She could confront him, but confrontation could cost her job. Every option felt like a trap. And then, something unexpected happened. A man at a nearby table, a mid-level executive from the same convention, shifted in his seat. He had heard enough to understand the danger in staying silent. His expression tightened, and he reached for his phone, slowly, deliberately. Alia didn't see what he planned to do. She only saw him glance at the CEO with a look of disbelief, then at her with quiet sympathy. It was the kind of look that said something was about to change. The first spark had already been lit. The real explosion was still moments away. The restaurant felt too small for what was happening. Every sound seemed sharper. Every breath felt louder. Alia stood frozen beside the billionaire's table, still holding the empty tray that now felt impossibly heavy. His insult hung in the air like smoke, settling into every corner of the room. But before she could decide what to do next, a soft buzz rippled across nearby tables. Phones had already come out. The mid-level executive who'd overheard everything was recording with a steady hand and an expression that carried equal parts disbelief and anger. The CEO noticed the camera a moment too late. His eyes narrowed, and his jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not in public. He demanded the customer stop recording. But the man didn't flinch. A quiet tension spread outward like shockwaves. Other guests lifted their phones, uncertain but emboldened. Even those who hadn't heard the insult began filming when they saw the CEO's reaction. Alia's manager rushed over, panic written across his face. He tried to intervene, to calm the CEO, to salvage what he believed was a crisis threatening the restaurant's reputation. But the CEO wasn't interested in calming down. His frustration exploded into arrogance, and he pointed directly at Alia, accusing her of incompetence, disrespect, and causing a scene. His voice rose with each word. He acted like he was the victim. Like the cameras should capture his outrage, not his cruelty. Alia felt her stomach drop. For a moment, she felt small again. She thought of every time she had swallowed an insult, every time she had tried to stay composed, and every time she had convinced herself that staying quiet was safer. But now silence wasn't hers to hold. It was being taken from her, broadcast through a dozen lenses. The CEO leaned closer, his voice sharper than before, and repeated the word that had cut her down minutes earlier. This time, it wasn't quiet. It echoed. Gasps spread across the room. A woman covered her mouth. A man shook his head in disgust. There was no mistaking the tone, the intent, or the history wrapped inside it. Aaliyah didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her expression, hurt layered over years of endurance, said everything. The CEO reached across the table as if to grab her attention, and that single movement made half the restaurant stand. Chairs scraped. Someone muttered a warning. Another customer stepped between them, not touching the CEO but blocking his path just enough to send a message. Enough. That was the moment everything snapped. The man filming, the one from the industry convention, finally lowered his phone. But instead of putting it away, he opened his company's internal group chat, the one used by hundreds of employees, partners, and executives attending the same event. He typed a short message, attached the video, and hit send. It spread faster than anyone in that room could imagine. Notifications exploded across the restaurant as phones buzzed with the same alert. People looked around in shock, realizing the incident wasn't just being witnessed, it was being broadcast through a network connected to the very people the CEO needed on his side. His confidence shifted into panic. He demanded the staff remove the troublemakers. He threatened lawsuits, firings, and consequences. But the restaurant had turned against him. No one stepped forward. Even Aaliyah's manager backed away when he saw the avalanche forming. Aaliyah watched as the man who had belittled her moments earlier began to unravel. For the first time in years, fear, real fear, flashed across his face. He wasn't afraid of her. He was afraid of the truth escaping. And it already had. By the time he stormed out of the restaurant, the video had reached inboxes, social feeds, and news forums across the convention center. People whispered his name in hallways. Screens lit up with the footage. The story was no longer contained. But Aaliyah had no idea just how far the fallout would reach. Because within the hour, the CEO would face something even he couldn't silence, the collapse of the most important deal of his career. And it all started with that recording. The fallout moved faster than anyone expected. Within hours, the video swept through the convention floors, then into boardrooms, then across social media feeds filled with shock and disbelief. People who had once admired the CEO's confidence now saw something different in his face: entitlement, hostility, and a cruelty that couldn't be explained away. By evening, the story had reached national outlets. Headlines didn't soften the blow. They quoted his own words, the ones he had spoken so casually, now played on repeat for millions to hear. The $3.5 billion deal he came to the city to finalize collapsed before he even reached his hotel. Investors withdrew, partners cut ties, and the board released a statement distancing themselves from his behavior. For the first time in years, the man who believed he was untouchable discovered what it felt like to face consequences. Aaliyah, meanwhile, woke to messages from strangers who had seen the footage. Some offered support. Others shared their own stories. She didn't feel like a symbol, but people treated her as one, someone who stood in the center of a moment that forced the world to look at an old wound. Her manager apologized, not with excuses but with visible regret, acknowledging the silence that had allowed moments like this to fester for far too long. She still felt the weight of what she had experienced, but it no longer lived in the shadows. It wasn't dismissed. It wasn't minimized. It was witnessed. In the days that followed, community leaders reached out. Advocacy groups used the video to start conversations in spaces where racism was usually ignored or softened. People who had never met Aaliyah debated the incident on TV panels, in classrooms, and at dinner tables. Some defended the CEO, insisting he had simply lost his temper. But many more saw the truth, a pattern that stretched far beyond one restaurant, one insult, one moment. Aaliyah didn't seek revenge. She didn't want notoriety. What she wanted was simple: respect, fairness, and the chance to work without carrying the burden of someone else's prejudice. What she received instead was a reminder that when silence breaks, it can echo farther than expected. The CEO disappeared from the spotlight, replaced by legal statements and ongoing investigations inside his own company. Aliyah returned to work, but her presence felt different. People saw her, not as someone to overlook, but as someone whose dignity mattered. And although the incident didn't erase years of quiet endurance, it marked a turning point in her sense of strength. What happened inside that restaurant was never just about an insult or a deal. It was about a truth that many people live with every day. A truth that often goes unseen until a camera catches it, or a witness refuses to stay quiet. So the question becomes, how many more moments like this are happening when no one is recording? How many stories go unheard because people are taught to endure instead of speak? And for everyone watching, when the next moment unfolds right in front of you, will you look away, or will you be the one who refuses to stay silent?